Welcome to IRO Live with host Bob Bay.
What I'm going to talk about tonight, we are moving forward into steps 8 and 9. Step 8 is we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And step 9 is we made direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. I really struggled with this one. I struggled with this one, these two together, a lot in the beginning because I'd messed up a lot of stuff, you know. I'd hurt a lot of people, and I didn't know how to make amends for it. Plus, I have a real problem with admitting when I'm wrong. Not because I just I hate to be wrong, but a big part of me hating to be wrong is because of the way it makes me feel. I don't feel good about myself when I'm wrong. It's not that I want to be right just to be right so I can be better than other people. I don't want to be wrong because of the way it makes me feel. It makes me feel wrong, not just what I did. I spent years walking in the thing of if I did something wrong, it wasn't that I did something wrong, it's that I was wrong. I really internalized it. And so when somebody would say something, when somebody would criticize something that I had done, when somebody would say something to me, if they didn't like something I'd done, the way I said something or anything like that, I would get incredibly defensive. I still at times struggle with being defensive in that because of that history of not wanting who I am to be wrong. Anybody relate? And so I really struggled with this step. And there were some things that I had to become willing to make amends for. And I was. I broke the law in a lot of ways, but I had hit that point, that ledge, not bottom, but remember I talked last week about the bottomless pit. You just hit a ledge. You can always keep falling if you decide to let go and chase other things. You'll just start falling again. So much was ready to be over with that part of my life. So when my sponsor had walked me through this thing of making this list and becoming willing, I was willing. But now, part of it would have meant possible jail time for me. And I know that in a lot of ways, a lot of times in programs, in recovery programs, they say you have to be willing to do anything, which means willing to walk in that jail time. Which I went to my sponsor and I was like, I don't know what to do on this. I'm willing. I guess if I have to do this, I will. But he said to me, Bob, wait a minute. Your wife is counting on you, right? At that time, we had a new baby. Well, she was 18 months old. She wasn't new, but she was young. Pam was a stay-at-home mom. If I went to jail, there would be serious repercussions, not just on me, but on others. And so God knew in my heart I was willing, but my sponsor said, Bob, you need to use some wisdom. Because when it says, go to step 9, when it says on step 9, we made direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. There was a part in that where I would be injuring a lot of other people other than myself. So there is an important side of this. However, we can't use that as an excuse not to work this step. Because what the foundation of this is, and this is what we're going to talk about tonight, what the foundation of what this step involves is justice and mercy. And those are really biblical terms, justice and mercy. I know that in the legal system we talk about justice. I know in our society today we talk a lot about justice. Justice is, for me, justice in my life is me walking in the consequences of my choices and actions. That's justice, right? Justice in my life means that I walk in the consequences of my choices and actions. Mercy is me not walking in the consequences of my choices and actions. But this is what I found over the last 30 years. Everybody wants justice when it comes to what other people have done to them. But everybody wants mercy when it comes to what they've done to other people. Everybody wants everybody else to walk in the consequences of their choices and actions when they've done something to hurt us. But when we do things, we look at our lives and we look at the motivation behind it, we look at all of the stuff, and we say, well, wait a minute. You don't really deserve to walk in all of those consequences. I shouldn't have to go through all of that. Is anybody willing to be honest enough to admit that? So that's what this is about in this step. God using, all of these steps are tools to teach us things. They're not just things that we do. These steps are tools for us to learn in our lives. And fundamental to living life on life's terms is understanding and walking in justice and mercy. And that's a huge problem with what's going on, what's wrong with the world today. People are not willing to walk in justice and mercy. There's tremendous injustice happening in this world today. And there is a mercy that is happening that is unjust. And that is because of the way our culture in the West. I can't speak about what it is in other countries. I can talk about the way it is here. And that's because of the way we've progressed in our lives. And I'll take that back and let's look at it in another part. Let's put this into real life, not some esoteric out there concepts of justice and mercy. I'm not talking about the legal system. I'm not talking about God's system of justice and mercy, although I am, but let's put it into context of our lives and what justice and mercy is. Justice and mercy also relates to setting and honoring boundaries. If we grow up in a world where we are not taught the healthy way to set and to honor boundaries, we will never learn how to set and honor boundaries in the relationships in our lives. Remember, relationships involve our relationship with God, our relationship with all the people around us, and the relationship with ourselves. And we have to learn to operate in this world. We have to learn to be able to set boundaries. Now, we can't set boundaries with God. We try. We say, God, you can have this much of me and no more. That's an unhealthy boundary. Right? We try to do that. But even God will honor that boundary. If we say, you could come this far and have this much of me, but no more. God understands boundaries. And he will respect those. He won't go any farther than you're willing to allow him to. But now with other people, we have to learn to set boundaries for other people in our relationships. This is what's allowed. When I say boundaries, that is the things that we will stand for and we won't stand for. The things that are how we interact, the way we interact, what's permitted in our relationship. And those are different for everybody. You have one set of boundaries for a spouse or a significant other. You have another set of boundaries for extended family. You have a set of boundaries for the person at Quick Trip. You have a set of boundaries for your boss. And so much of the time what happens is as we grow up, we have not been taught the way to have healthy boundaries. And because we don't understand healthy boundaries, we are not able to apply consequences to those boundaries. Because this is the only way you learn to respect boundaries and set boundaries, is to understand that there are consequences for not honoring those boundaries, either giving or taking. there are two types of consequences when it comes to setting boundaries. It's the natural consequences. An example would be if you go out and you play in the traffic in the road, a natural consequence of playing in traffic is going to be you're going to be hit by a car. An applied consequence would be, the boundary is, you are not allowed to play in the road. If you play in the road, I'm taking away your tablet. I'm taking away screen privileges if you play in the road. That's an applied consequence. We apply consequences because we don't want people to walk in the natural consequences. We apply the consequence of, if you play in the road, I'm going to take your tablet away, to try and teach them to respect that boundary for their own good so that they don't have to walk in the natural consequence of being hit by a bus. And you learn that as you're growing up. Now, what ends up happening, and has happened in our culture, is people don't know how to set healthy boundaries and apply healthy consequences, so children don't learn how to honor those, and so they don't understand consequences for crossing boundaries. We don't understand the consequences for crossing boundaries. We weigh the cost with the idea of mercy, that we are not going to have to walk in those consequences, and then we take that step and cross the boundary. And then when the other person gets mad and reacts, we think it's unfair. It's unfair that they treated us like that. Because we look at our lives. Is everybody with me? This is tough stuff. And so children growing up don't learn how to do all of that, so they end up developing coping skills on how to walk through life. And they spend life, because they're trying to meet their needs and they have those coping skills, so they begin to cross boundaries of the people around them. And they begin to set boundaries, but they can't maintain healthy boundaries. And so people are always crossing their boundaries. And so the pain and the hurt continues for the other people around them and for them. So there is no justice and no mercy. We begin setting boundaries and applying consequences at a young age so that people don't have to walk in the natural consequences of it. Justice is people walking in the natural consequences. So as we get older, the applied consequences become natural consequences. Like applied consequences in Pam and mine's relationship. If you do this, then this will happen. If you do this, then this is the way I'll flip it around and say, Pam can apply consequences to Bob. Bob, if you don't put your dirty socks in the laundry, they're not going to get washed. Because I'm not coming in and picking up your clothes. It's your job. Pam and I have an agreement. There are things that she takes care of, and there are things that I take care of. Right? And we've worked out those boundaries. Here's a boundary I have. My dresser, the top of my dresser, I have a long dresser, that is my domain. I can have it stacked as high with knickknacks and junk and projects and pajamas and blankets and just whatever I want. And no matter how badly that irritates Pam, she has no right to cross my boundary. That is my boundary. Now, yes, I understand it would be considerate because we share the bedroom if I would do it, but I have so few places that are mine, and that is one of them. I'm trying to illustrate the boundaries that we set in life. Fences and rails we have to put to keep things from being crossed, keep things from getting broken. And in our lives, we set these things. And other people have boundaries. There are voiced boundaries and there are unvoiced boundaries. There are certain things that, whether somebody tells you that's a boundary or not, That's a boundary. It is given in our society. You do not steal from people. That is a boundary. And there is a natural consequence to crossing that boundary, right? If you steal from someone, you've crossed a boundary. If you borrow money from someone with the idea that you're going to pay it back, and you don't pay it back, you are walking in injustice. You have crossed a boundary, and you must walk in the consequences of crossing that boundary. If you're expected to pay that back, whether you think you should or not, you should. To learn justice and mercy, we have to learn to walk in our consequences. But what's the other side of it? Mercy comes in when the consequences are so destructive that walking in the fullness of those consequences would cause irreparable damage or would serve no purpose. What do I mean by that? Let me give you an example. I'm going to give you an example of boundaries and consequences. When I was 9 or 10 years old, I have a twin brother, and whenever, like at Christmas time, if he got something, I got the same thing, you know. Being a twin, you always get the same thing as your twin when it comes to birthdays and Christmas, because parents don't want you fighting over the stuff. I don't know if that's why or not. But anyway, so my brother and I got new 10-speed Schwinn bicycles. And these things were giant for 10-year-olds. I think we were 10. We might have been 9, 10. They were giant for us because they were gotten with the idea that we would grow into them. We would have them for years as we grew up. However, at 10 years old, and we lived on a cul-de-sac out in the county, at 10 years old, your world is very small. And so you guys know I'm ADD Bob. And so I would go out and ride my bike. I loved riding my bike. I would ride my bike. And to stop, most of the time, it meant a controlled crash because I had to drop off the seat and to the side to touch the ground. But I learned the controlled crash, and then my bike would just, and I wasn't like really strong enough to get the kickstand down. I'd lay it down. And so most of the time, my bike would end up laying in the front yard. Now, my mom and dad would tell me, Bob, don't leave your bike laying in the front yard. Now, as adults, why wouldn't you leave your bike laying in the front yard? Somebody's going to steal it. As a 10-year-old, in my world, I had no concept of that. The idea that somebody would come and take my bike I had no thought of it. So there was a boundary set. Bob, when you're done riding your bike, you put your bike away. I did not keep that boundary. And guess what happened? Somebody stole my bike. I was brokenhearted. My whole world evolved around that bike. That was freedom to me. I loved it. It was a huge part of who I was. But my bike got stolen. I didn't understand, okay? And I'm not speaking ill of my parents at all. I love my parents. They had told me, and so it got stolen. And so I was like, well, what are we going to do? We looked for it for a couple of days, but it was gone. Who knows where it ended up at? And so I said, well, can I get a new bike? No, you can't. Well, but why not? Well, you had a bike and it got stolen. So my parents allowed me to walk in the consequence of that. It broke my heart. I didn't understand the consequence, but I had to walk in it, whether I liked it or not. So at that age, when there's not an understanding, we have to learn from applied consequences about boundaries and about rules, right? A better thing would have been, Bob, if you leave your bike in the front yard, I'm going to take it away for a week. And then I leave it out there one time, and odds are it didn't get stolen I had the bike for like 3 months before it got stolen. So odds are it wouldn't have gotten stolen, and I would have learned. Now, what is that? Applying that consequence. That would have been mercy, right? It was mercy that I didn't have to walk in the natural consequences of leaving my bike out. Now fast forward, we're adults. And God says, listen, if you operate your life in this way, there are going to be consequences and things are going to happen. And we don't walk in the consequences of that immediately. And so we think we're exempt from the consequences. And so we continue to walk in there and deny it. But then at some point we suffer the consequences of it, and we think it's unfair and unjust, right? I give that example to go back and say, the idea behind applying those consequences in that is to discipline us when we're young so that we understand and we grow in understanding in that. As adults, we can't go back and redo that. We have to come from now. These steps, this step right here, step 9, we made direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. The act of working this step is a lesson in justice. And who's it justice for? Us. Because we go back to the list that we made in step 4 and all the people we have harmed and what we have done, and now we must make amends for that. We must walk in some type of consequence for that. Now, why do we have to do that? There are a lot of people just totally skip this step because they don't think it's necessary. They don't think it's fair. They don't think they should have to. But why is that? Because they don't understand justice and mercy, and they've never understood boundaries and consequences. So they think that they should have mercy. But now if anybody's on the other side of that and have wronged them, they better experience justice, for goodness sake. And they better pay for it. Right? I mean, I'm being honest. So aside from the fact that we just make things right, we learn justice in this. But because we don't understand that, that's why it's so important to have a sponsor or a mentor or a spiritual guide who's been through this that can help us and guide us in this, just like my sponsor did, to be able to give me wisdom in dealing with this. Now let me give you another example of this. So you go back and you make this list, and one of the people, 2 of the people, 3 of the people, but I'll put it in a different category. 2 of the people on my list of people that I had harmed deeply were my children. At first, it was my oldest, because I was still active in addiction when she was a toddler, and I was still messed up even though I was sober and clean. I was still messed up for many years afterwards. And I was messed up for the first part of my youngest daughter's life, still making dumb decisions and doing dumb things. And they had to walk in the consequences of that. They walked in the consequences of my dumb choices. And so for justice and mercy, how do you make amends for that? Or I should say for justice, we're talking about justice right now. For justice, how do you make amends for doing dumb stuff and your kids walking in the consequences of that? Well, you can't. You can't. In any other way, I mean, there are maybe some things, if you take money from your kids' piggy bank, then you got to pay it back, you know. There are those things. But this is what my sponsor told me, and what I tell everyone that I sponsor in this part of this step is, this is how you make amends. And you must make amends in this. You make amends by being the best you can be for the rest of your life. We're given that choice today. This is how I work this step. When I'm faced with the choice to do dumb stuff, to make selfish choices that will harm my family, I make amends by stopping and saying, I may want to do this, but this will hurt my family. So I am not going to do this. I'm going to press on to God, and I'm going to do the right thing. And if I feel like I don't have the strength to overcome that, then I keep pressing in. And I keep pressing in. Because I don't want my children to have to walk in the consequences of my choices. Now, I say 3, that I have 2 children. The third one is Pam. How can I ever make up for the stuff that she went through while I was active in my addiction or in the beginning? I can't. I've said I'm sorry. I've gone to both of my daughters. And when things have come up and I've remembered different things, I've had to go back and say, listen, this and this happened. Do you remember that? Yeah, I remember that, Dad. Listen, I want to tell you, I am so sorry. That was so wrong of me to do that. I should not have done that. And I've always been met with, it's okay, Dad. I forgive you. It's all right. You're a good dad. It's okay. I've gone to Pam and I've said, listen, I'm sorry. When this and this happened, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. It was not the way to be. But saying I'm sorry is not making amends. Making amends is doing things differently. Asking forgiveness is one thing, but that's not making amends. Making amends is doing things different. If we expect the world to be just, just is walking in justice. If we expect the world to be just for us, we must be willing to walk in justice for ourselves. We must be willing to walk in justice for ourselves and learn that through this process. Now you can say, listen, I don't need to do all that. I already understand. Well, that right there, like I said, in and of itself is you not understanding what justice is. If you're unwilling to walk in justice, you need to do this so that you learn what it means to walk in justice. So that's when we have done things to other people, we must walk in justice for ourselves if we expect the world to be just towards us. That is, if we expect God to work on our behalf, to orchestrate events in our lives, to take care of us and make the world just towards us, we're going to face unjust things in life. But God says, all things work together for good to those that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. God will turn everything around if we are walking in justice. If we are not willing to walk in justice ourselves, God will not operate on our behalf for justice. I'm going to break all of that down in the Bible as we go. It's a biblical principle. You will reap what you sow. If you live in injustice, you will receive injustice. Now, what's the other side of it? It is mercy. Now, this is the one. I had a hard time with justice. But I really had a hard time with mercy. Because you know what this involves? Forgiving. Because remember, there was 2 categories when we made the list back on step 4. We had a list of people that we have harmed, but then there was also this list of people that have harmed us. And so we associate, and I use the words like resentment, bitterness, unforgiveness. Now, what is it to forgive somebody? That is mercy. And just as plainly and clearly the Bible says, God says, you don't forgive others their trespasses, I will not forgive you. Plain and simple. If we want mercy, we must extend mercy. If we want justice, we must walk justly. And that is at the root of so much trouble that we're in as a society today. We want justice for others. We want other people to walk in justice and us to walk in mercy. When it comes to forgiveness, forgiveness has nothing to do with restoration of a relationship. Nothing to do with it. Now, forgiveness can be the first step in the restoring of a relationship. It could be. But it has nothing to do with the restoration of a relationship. There are people that have wronged me that I've forgiven, and I have absolutely no desire to breathe the air in the room that they're breathing. Doesn't mean I haven't forgiven them. I've forgiven them. I wish them well. I pray for them. I hope that God will do things in their lives to help them walk in peace in that, so that they don't have to walk in the consequences of their actions towards me. I don't want them to have to walk in the consequences of what they've done to me. And I have to let God be the one who teaches them that they can't do it to other people. But for me to walk in peace and to walk in mercy, for me to receive mercy, I have to be willing to extend that to other people. And that is hard. I struggle with it. I still, in many ways, struggle with it today. I talk about, and I'm honest a lot of times about the issues I struggle with anger sometimes. And a lot of that has to deal with the feeling of injustice. I feel like there's injustice. And that is the root of that is people have hurt me, and I'm walking in a degree of unforgiveness, and so I feel like things are unjust towards me. Does that make sense? This is important. We've been talking about the keys to living life in a winning way. You guys want to win in life, right? That doesn't mean that if you win, somebody else has to lose. I want everybody to win. I want everybody to thrive in life. And there are certain principles, no matter what you believe, no matter what your foundational beliefs are. If you walk in injustice, you will reap injustice. If you walk in mercy, you will reap mercy. That's just the way it is. It's the way the world is set up. It's the way God created it. But whether you believe in God or not, that's the way it is. I talked last week about consequences, and I gave the example of my old red truck and not having to walk in the consequences of forgetting and not being a good caretaker of my truck. Because what God will do is, and we don't get to decide where that point is, but what God will do is when he knows that as he's teaching you to walk in mercy and justice, he knows where that point is, to where you don't have to walk in the consequences. He knows when to extend mercy and to work in the environment around you to extend mercy. He will move heaven and earth to help us. I've seen it too much. I've seen it too many times. But the thing is we don't get to decide when that teachable moment is enough. We don't get to say, I learned my lesson. Really, I promise. I learned my lesson. I'll never do it again. Because he knows. So if you're still walking in the consequences of something, you know you haven't learned your lesson. Sometimes we walk in those consequences and we have learned our lesson, but God wants to be sure that we won't repeat it. If we repeat it in a way, we didn't really learn the lesson, right? But in a way, we can learn the lesson, but just know, okay, you know what? No, really, I'm never doing this again. I'm never. I mean, I said that before, but I mean, really. You know, it's like when you're drinking and you get sick. I'm never doing that again. And then the next weekend comes and you go out bar hopping and you end up being sick and throwing up. Well, I'm never doing that again. I know you guys probably didn't go through that. I'm probably the only one who did that. But then there comes a point where I'm never doing, no, really, I mean it. I'm never doing that.
Thanks for listening. Please comment and subscribe for upcoming podcasts. To order your copy of My Real Life, go to the Take Action page at our website, reallifeministries-stl.com, or go to Real Life Ministries STL on Facebook.